Welcome to the greatest show on earth, the Blast Radius. We got to push all the buttons over here.
Atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we are so backward and unprogressive we still think boys have a penis and girls have a vagina. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. Welcome to the Blast Radius. So glad you could join us. Here is your Decline of Western Civilization news roundup for the work week ending 8 March 2024. Dateline Washington, Monday, 4 March. While 9-0 Supreme Court decisions aren't nearly as rare as some people think, in point of fact, there are more 9-0 decisions than any other kind. When you get a 9-0 decision in a high-profile case from probably the most ideologically divided court of the last 150 years, that is the Supreme Court's way of saying, seriously? You brought us something this freaking stupid? Which is exactly what happened this week when, in a decision that was a surprise to absolutely no one who can tell their ass from a hole in the ground, the High Court held that no, neither Colorado nor any other state can simply decree who is allowed to appear on a presidential ballot and who is not. So, as if we needed any confirmation of the fact that the unelected Colorado Secretary of State can't simply declare Donald Trump guilty of a criminal offense with which he has never been charged, which occurred allegedly thousands of miles away from Colorado, and use that as a pretext for excluding him from the election and thus disenfranchising the population of an entire state? Well, now we have it. And why would any idiot actually think they could get away with something so self-evidently hostile to the precepts of the democracy they claim to cherish? Because Trump's psychosis complex is one hell of a drug, that's why. Dateline Brussels, Tuesday, 5 March. The European Union announced this week that the only fitting response to Russia's bellicose attempts at territorialist expansion is by its own bellicose attempts at territorialist expansion. So the EU says they are going to massively step up their efforts to create a standing military and to outfit it with billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of weapons and equipment and materiel. But wait, I hear you say, doesn't every EU member state already have a standing army? Well, yes, they do. And doesn't NATO also exist? And isn't NATO's stated purpose to forestall Russian territorial expansion? Yes, it does. And yes, it is. But like a man once said in a movie, why buy one when you can buy 2 for twice the price. And let's go ahead and say the quiet part out loud, shall we? The EU is very desirous of building its own military, but it doesn't have anything to do with guarding against external threats. They want to build an armed goon squad they can use to terrorize the population of any member state that gets any ideas about trying to leave the club. So welcome to the 21st century version of the Fortress Europe Roach Motel, where you can check in, but you can never check out. Dateline, Columbia, South Carolina, Wednesday, 6 March. Comedians around the country cried tears of heartbreak this week when Nikki Haley abandoned her campaign for the presidency. Nikki Haley, whom you might have noticed, uses exactly the same cadence and intonation for every sentence she speaks. In fact, if you built a wind-up politician using 1970s technology, it might sound exactly like Nikki Haley sounds in real life. It's really kind of creepy how there's never any deviation in the way she speaks the words she says. One can't imagine that none of her handlers has noticed this problem and urged her to correct it. Someone on her staff could do her a great service by erasing all of the commas from the text of her speeches. So farewell, Nikki Haley. I feel like we hardly knew ye, and that's probably for the better. But still, we owe you our thanks for creating a phenomenon we never thought we would see. Woke Democrat voters, leftist mega donors throwing their support behind an unreconstructed 1990s neocon who still thinks the Iraq War was a good idea. So remember, when you kick them, it hurts more when you're wearing heels, and Trump psychosis complex is one hell of a drug. Dateline Gaza, Thursday, 7 March. In a story that seems to perfectly typify Joe Biden's Middle East policy, hell, maybe his whole presidency entirely, 5 Palestinian civilians were killed this week when the United States made airdrops of humanitarian aid packages which landed on their heads and caused them to assume room temperature. And so far as I'm aware, this is the first such story anywhere in the world in at least the last 80 years, because normally when you're making airdrops of humanitarian aid, you take one of 2 approaches. You either drop packages that are too light to hurt or kill anyone, or you announce in advance where the drop's going to be and you make sure the civilians are warned in advance to stay clear of the area. But then, why bother airdropping humanitarian aid into Gaza in the first place when you know perfectly well it will all be taken by Hamas anyway? If one were inclined toward cynicism, one might suspect it was all just a dramatic production done for the benefit of the fake news media with no practical purpose except to make Joe Biden look like a loving, benevolent grandfather who kills you by dropping food on your head. Dateline Berlin, Friday, 8 March. In the latest example of the woke leftist Ouroboros gleefully devouring its own tail, a German extremist group calling itself Der Vulkangruppe, or the Volcano Group for the non-Teutonically inclined, claimed responsibility this week for sabotaging a Tesla production facility located in the Berlin suburb of Grünheide, which seems weird because the wokesters are always telling us how much they sparkly heart electric cars, how electric cars are going to save us from being destroyed by the sun monster, how we're going to one day live in a big, beautiful woke-topia where nobody burns fossil fuels and the entire surface of the planet has been lovingly festooned with mirrors and solar panels and bat-chomping, bird-slicing eco-crucifixes, and every shitty third-world country has been thoroughly strip-mined of its rare earth minerals so they can all drive fancy electric cars and buy a $1,000 brand-new smartphone every year. But your correspondent digresses. Let's hear it from the Vulkangruppe themselves. Quote, "We sabotaged Tesla today. Tesla eats Earth, resources, people, labor, and spits out SUVs, killing machines, and monster trucks. Our gift for March 8th is to shut down Tesla," end quote. So if they hate gas-powered cars and they hate electric cars just as much, mightn't we conclude that they just hate vehicular locomotion in general? The irony of which probably never occurred to any of them when they went home after bombing the Tesla factory and ordered their dinner on DoorDash. But then, self-awareness has never been an attribute that our woke leftist friends have possessed in any great abundance. And that, ladies and gentlemen, and non-binaries, is your decline of Western civilization news roundup for last week. May it rest in peace. And with that, I pass the control yoke over to my intrepid and illustrious co-host, first ballot inductee in the Large Furry Hominid Hall of Fame, the one and only your friend and mine, Mr. Caucasian Sasquatch.
Tactical nuke incoming!
Everything always sucks so terribly bad. Man, StreamYard has been just a mess lately. Just an absolute spaghetti plate, let me tell you. Welcome to the Blast Radius, folks. We're going to be discussing Dune tonight. We're going to talk about some various things in the current news cycle. And also, there's that pesky old State of the Union address where good old Uncle Biden might have slipped up on a few of his little wordsies there. You know how that goes. But, right? So that's what we're going to do. And hopefully, we're going to do a fairly decent job of it. So at this point, I think what we're going to do is put this together like a regular old show. Now, what will be on the screen over here is actually Midlife Bro Logic, and I did a live reaction to the State of the Union address, and I'm going to use it as bright, flashy lights and, stuff for y'all to be entertained by. Watch his face. He looks like he wants to chew his shoulder off. Anyway. So,
which he might have done if they'd pumped him full any more speed.
Son, oh man. I made a call during this live stream while I was watching. I made a call that he would make it 12 and a half minutes before he started stumbling over his words. And from that point on, the countdown was borrowed time. And I almost nailed it. I think he started stumbling his words at the 13-minute mark, if I remember right.
Which is a pretty big upset for him to enunciate clearly for 12 minutes or more.
Yeah, I mean, there was a few moments where phrasing was less than desirable, perhaps.
Can I ask you a question right now?
Hmm?
Why do we need sign language interpreters in a world where closed captioning exists?
Every now and then, I kind of felt like she was just clowning on him.
Oh, I know. You sometimes get that kind of. Remember, was it Airplane or Airplane 2 where the
yeah exactly
the sign language interpreter starts going
right? Like
it was one of the Airplane movies. I think it was Airplane 2.
I'm wondering whether or not she got a copy of the script ahead of time or right during the start, and she was doing it by ear, because there's a couple of times where she gets this absolute just believe me, bro. Look, like
yeah, there's always that moment when the sign language person you half expect them to just go, I have no idea what this old man's trying to say. I fucking give up. Like I might as well be doing this with mittens on.
It's amazing. Some of the things that he was claiming, like he said that he had already changed the face of cancer, as if
this was, I mean, not just State of the Union addresses, but presidential speeches in general. This might have been the most hostile, mean-spirited one I have seen in my entire life.
But does it outdo the Dark Brandon?
Well, and then the Independence Hall speech, the Dark Brandon speech, is probably number 2.
Okay, wow. We have a new pretender to the throne, I suppose.
Yeah, gold and silver medals both go to Joe Biden. Probably the first time in his life he's won anything.
Legitimately.
Should I do my little monologue and then we'll discuss more?
Yeah. Okay. Let me do that thing. There you go.
I did prepare a bit of a monologue because it can't be easy being Joe Biden's medical staff, because here's the reality. When you're the president, you occasionally have to appear in public and remain awake and semi-lucid for upwards of an hour, things that are not among Joe Biden's strengths. Things Joe Biden simply can't do unless somebody pumps him full of a whole shitload of amphetamines before they send him out there. So you pump him full of a whole shitload of amphetamines and you no longer have to worry about him falling asleep in the middle of a speech. But do you know what the downside of that is? It means you get 20 to 25 minutes of angry grandpa screaming insults at people and shaking his fist at nobody in particular. But that's the other difficult thing about being Joe Biden. You want to show the country and the voters that you are healthy and vigorous and energetic, but you're not any of those things. You're Joe Biden. You're an 81-year-old man with at least 1.5 feet in the grave. You're a man for whom ambulating from one side of a stage to the other is like Nick Wallenda walking a high wire. Although, to be fair, Nick Wallenda has significantly less trouble walking a wire over the caldera of an active volcano than Joe Biden does walking 10 feet across flat, level ground. So when your assignment is to show the country that you're healthy and vigorous and energetic, as it was Thursday night, if you are the desiccated husk of Joseph R. Biden, you have no way of achieving that except for yelling really loudly and shaking your fist like you were the bastard love child of Mussolini and Khrushchev, which we got a whole hell of a lot of in the first half of this speech, if nothing else. In terms of its sheer volume level, this was the Spinal Tap of political speeches, easily the loudest State of the Union address since the invention of the microphone and the loudspeaker, which Joe remembers very well since those things were invented back when he was in college. But then, the other downside of sending your president out there all hopped up on speed is that after that golden 20 to 25 minutes of the angry grandpa routine, the speed starts to wear off. And then you get the inevitable come down. The volume gets turned down a little bit, the pace slows, everything gets a little bit more slurry and mumbly, and before long, you are left with a semi-animated cadaver vomiting random nonsense sounds out of his face hole. And that's the end of my monologue.
Okay, I'm over here shilling in chat. My bad.
That's all right.
Sasquatch got to do what a Sasquatch got to do, bro.
A Sasquatch does indeed.
You know. All right. So I think he did quite well considering the first 10 minutes or so. He was more or less on point as far as basic details, although the details he chose to highlight were kind of diametrically opposed to my perception of events. Like he talks about.
Oh, yeah. You mean there's reality on one hand and the things the president says on the other hand. Because I let's face it, a lot of the things he says are just the absolute diametric opposite of demonstrable reality. Like,
yeah,
if you want to call them lies, I guess that's a simpler way of putting it. But just things that are manifestly, absolutely not remotely true.
Demonstrably not true. Like, it's rare that you can actually prove something a negative because it's really hard to find evidence of a negative. You can only find the lack.
Yeah.
And that's generally not considered proof. But in this case,
I was especially struck by the fact that he opens the speech, you know, just talking about open-ended foreign military adventures like they're just the best thing in the world, and all the Democrats in the room cheer uproariously. The same people who were marching against the Iraq War 20 years ago and calling themselves peaceniks and pacifists. But
what bothers me is they're over there clapping and bobbing their head like circus seals. Or
yeah. He talks about NATO expansion as if it's a cause for celebration. Weren't we supposed to be working toward a world where NATO doesn't need to exist?
You remember the Manifest Destiny era?
Not personally, but I've read about it. Joe Biden probably does.
I'm getting weird Manifest Destiny vibes from NATO. Like, I'm not digging on it neither, because I feel like we're gonna end up footing the bill for the whole freaking shindig and cooking ourselves in the process. And I'm not a fan of any of that.
No,
I mean,
and
you and I named
the
show,
idea.
Hopefully, ironically, in an effort to prevent this very secret
idea that the idea that Russia wants to conquer any place that is not a former Soviet republic that is predominantly populated by ethnic Russian people is complete and utter nonsense. And that is the entire intellectual linchpin of NATO expansion. It is a house that is built on non-existent foundations. In other words, sandy, it's going to slide right off the hill if that's your. But they're going to do it anyway because the military-industrial complex is a powerful thing. It can afford a lot of shit. It can afford a lot of politicians. It can afford a lot of media outlets, and it's the Nikki Haley's presidential candidacy is testament to the power of the military-industrial complex because. How many millions of dollars did she have rolling in from leftist mega donors who just want to keep the defense contractors flush with cash?
And the anybody but Trump crowd. And they mean it. Anybody.
Yeah, which like I mentioned in the news roundup, it's an exceedingly strange thing to look at. People who fancy themselves sensitive left-wing liberal peaceniks going out and falling all over each other to vote for somebody like Nikki Haley, who quite literally is an unreconstructed 1990s neoconservative. The way she talks, it's like she's running against Bob Dole for the nomination in 96. If it was 96, hell, she sounds great, but it's not 96. It's actually many, many years after 1996. I don't know who that spiel that she was putting out was supposed to appeal to in terms of actual voters in the country and not just corporate interests and defense contractors and the administrative state. I think that's exactly who she was playing to. But now that she's gotten herself on the somehow, some way on the good side of the left, she will fail upward in the way that all leftists fail upward, especially leftist women. When you try a thing and you fail at it, they always give you a golden parachute and a soft landing. You get a Netflix documentary and a book deal and a CNN contributor contract, of which I'm sure she will amass all three within the next several months.
Hold on. I'm sorry. I just noticed something. Is it just me, or has he got the hard Beavis going on? Like
the what now?
He's got his hands stuck straight out like this the whole time. Look at him. He's doing the Beavis. Like Beavis and Butthead.
Oh yeah. I am Cornholio. He needs to pull his shirt up over the top of his head.
That's all.
I will lay waste to your bunghole.
Watch his mouth. It's like his mouth is on autopilot. It is a very strange. I don't know, man. I heard tell that one of Disney's animatronics was on the loose and it got elected president.
Yeah, exactly. And Nikki Haley's not far off from that too, because I'm not making that shit up about her intonation and cadence of every single sentence. Like I find it impossible to even listen to her because every sentence sounds exactly the goddamn same. It's like you wind her up and like a toy. And she walks out there and she's only got, fuck. It's just infuriating.
Anyone but Trump. Anyone but Trump.
Yeah. And I'm, like I said, I'm still at a loss to understand who she thinks her target audience is or was, except for, the big corporate interests to whom she is so obviously in thrall.
I mean,
I was struck. Dude. I was struck also, Biden, at the 5-minute mark, he uses the word Russian as a pejorative. Like there's nothing worse in the world than simply being a Russian. As if that is some sort of moral atrocity. And I thought we weren't supposed to be about that kind of ethnic prejudice as Americans. I thought ethnic prejudice was supposed to be bad. I guess unless you're a Russian is how that works.
Our chat has gone a little bit haywire over here. They're trying to put Biden together with Dune, with Beavis and Butthead, and they've come up with the great Dune Holio.
Oh, that's beautiful. I like that.
Because chat's schizophrenic, it can't help itself. What's up, big deal, dude? It's good to see you, bud. Like you said, you've got your two choices here. One side, you have Biden, who's over here looking kind of like a wind-up doll who's running towards the end of his clock. And then you've got Nikki Haley, that they're wanting to run against. And I don't even understand how she was ever even in the offing in the first place, except for all of that buku beautiful money she just raked in out of nowhere.
Well, yeah, and even when she tries to explain her own appeal, she doesn't talk about her great policy positions or her detailed political philosophy. She says, "I'm a chick and I'm brown."
Right?
That's literally what she says.
Okay.
Which is I thought only the wokesters did that.
So,
but apparently not.
Who's Trump's VP choice right now? If he had to pick it tonight,
I think it's Tim Scott. I think he's already made the choice. I think it's going to be Tim Scott for sure. I've never been more certain about a thing ever. What do you think?
I don't know. I think that there might be a larger population of very competent women in the Republican Party. I suspect, much like what was the White House press secretary's name, McEnany. What's her name?
Kayleigh McEnany.
McEnany. She, someone like her who is a shark with blood in the water. I think if you look around, you might find you a couple of real toothy ladies that would be willing to step into that position. And while the vice president doesn't have an enormous amount of power, they have the ability. They specifically have the president's ear. That's part of
right.
Their power.
And I know as far as Mike Pence goes, there was a falling out. And he and Trump pretty much can't stand each other now. However, I maintain the belief that Mike Pence was really incredibly effective as a running mate and a vice president. He was a really effective. He often was a more articulate messenger for Trump's message than Trump was. And whether he actually believed any of it or not is immaterial. And I think Tim Scott is the guy who is best positioned to do a similar thing this time. I mean, he, as far as the best public speakers go of the people we have heard their names bandied about as potential running mates, I think he blows everybody else out of the water. I think he's one of the best public speakers in the entire party, frankly.
Okay. So,
and as far as the women whose names we've heard bandied about, I mean, Carrie Lake obviously is very impressive, but I don't think she has much of a national profile. I don't know. I don't really have a preference as far as man or woman.
Well, that's the MTG.
I think not only is Tim Scott probably the best pick from where we sit right now, but I think it's pretty clear that Trump is leaning toward going in his direction.
You are aware that Vermin is still running for president. He's still in the offing. Are you familiar with Vermin? Vermin Supreme?
Mm-mm.
All right. So every presidential cycle of the last 20 years has had this additional name stuck on the ticket. And it's not always actually put on the ticket depending on the laws of the state. But if all of the people running for president were on every ticket, it would all include the name Vermin Supreme, which is this old guy from like California or Arizona or somewhere. But every single presidential election, he puts his name in the hat and he never pulls it out. And so technically speaking, he is the longest running candidate that I know of in human history. He has had more presidential elections under his belt than any 5 presidents.
It's too bad Ralph Nader doesn't run anymore. We could use some Ralph Nader. He's still alive, I believe.
Yeah, but are you going to shove a shock rod up his ass and move his mouth around for him? Isn't that just as bad as what we're doing with Biden? I mean, I'm just saying.
I think he's probably in better shape than Biden is, but then most people are.
Yeah, that's not a high bar to get over, bro. I mean,
yeah, it's not a high bar to get over.
There's at least one transgender basket weaving Eskimo out there that could hop that one.
There was another thing that made me laugh around the 5-minute mark of this speech when he was celebrating or Sweden's membership in NATO, and he says,
Right.
Sweden knows how to fight, which to me is a strange thing to say about a country that has been neutral for over 200 years. I'm just saying.
Right. I mean,
And then he goes on to say something I actually found pretty shocking. He says NATO is the most powerful military in history. And I'm sorry, people who are defending against external aggression don't talk about how powerful they are. That just expansionist aggressors are who talks like that. He's saying the quiet part out loud again. Is what I'm getting at here.
there's no two ways about it. The intention of NATO is to absorb any other member states it can find, as governments tend to do. Do you think they're intending to utilize NATO as the world government head, or something else going to be insinuated into that position?
I think in Brussels, the utopia they imagine for themselves in 15 or 20 years is, I think what they would like to see Ursula von der Leyen and her crowd is a European Union that encompasses all of Europe, where it's a roach motel. You can check in, but you can't check out. It is centrally powerful enough to where your national boundaries pretty much might as well not even exist for all practical purposes. And then I think they would like to use NATO as the EU military. They would just have to get rid of us and the Brits. But you could take some form of NATO and co-opt it for that purpose. But who knows? Maybe they're going to have a standing military in addition to NATO. It seems rather duplicative to me, doesn't it?
What was that saying?
I mean,
why make one when you can have two for twice the price?
I just made that joke in the update or the roundup. Yeah, yeah, and you're exactly right. Why buy one when you can buy two for twice the price? And it's funny, but that is actually the way these people think.
Yep. And all I wanted was a
And I think I think a lot of people are, rather than being frightened of the prospect of World War III, I think they probably welcome it, because it would be a chance for them to consolidate their power. And that's the only thing they really care about ultimately. I mean, we know we are dealing with people who would be more than willing to burn down the world and everything in it, as long as they get to exercise hegemonic rule over the ashes and the embers and the whatever remains.
I'll never understand.
They would be happy to take us back to a hunter-gatherer civilization if it meant they always got to wield absolute power. They would not hesitate even for an inkling of a moment.
Bankers are the modern shamans.
Yeah,
they just invent currency out of nothing, and so it's just as good as magic when it comes down to it, as well as the power they wield.
You know that Joe Biden has printed and spent more money than all other presidents combined?
As I understand it, in the past, 3 years, call it 5 years. In the last 5 years, as much money is circulating as was circulating previous to that 5 years, ever.
Yep.
It's absurd. So, I mean, this makes
And we really don't have anything underpinning the value of all this fake money being printed, except for the historical prestige of the dollar itself. And that is a very, very dangerous tightrope to walk, especially when you're importing upwards of 10 million unskilled foreigners into the country and putting them all on welfare.
Right.
When they're not raping and murdering our daughters.
Yeah, there's that part too. Because, I mean, honestly, when you're going to bring up the immigrant murder...
Yeah, we probably need to talk about that part.
Yeah. Say it right. Say the name correctly, please.
Laken Riley. Laken.
Right.
And it's, you have to give the president credit. There's not many people alive who could actually hold up the button right next to their face while saying the name and still get the name wrong. State of the Union addresses are supposed to be structured so that it is impossible for the president to look bad. And even still, even after 50 years of the most impossibly blunder-filled career in the history of U.S. politics, Joe Biden still manages to invent new and creative ways of putting the ball in the back of his own net, which you shouldn't be able to do in the context of a State of the Union speech. It should be impossible, but he still manages because he is Joe Biden. He said he was going to be historic. He didn't lie.
There's another feature that was in the State of the Union that actually raised my the hackles on the back of my neck a little bit. They're talking about expanding essentially what is the Head Start program and bringing children into the education system even earlier.
Well, we got to get them reading that gay porn early, don't we?
Kind of expected you to go right there. We're gonna have to discuss subversion and humor.
Yeah. Anytime the government says they want to take care of your kids, believe me, there is an ulterior motive, and it ain't good.
It's never good. I've never actually had an experience where the government showed up and made things better in any facet.
And
ever.
Even Democrats and Republicans both do this now because we have no conservative party. We just have a super liberal party and a slightly less liberal party. Everybody talks about wanting to help you out with your childcare. Nobody ever mentions, maybe let's try and get back to a society where mothers, should they choose, can stay home and raise their freaking children by themselves. Because you know what? A lot of women would like to do that. And the children would benefit immeasurably being raised by their actual mother.
Okay.
Nobody ever mentions that at all. It simply is taken for granted that both parents have to work and the kids have to be raised by childcare providers. And that disgusts me.
So the Department of Education, keep it or dump it.
I would challenge anyone within the sound of my voice to give me one fact-based reason why the existence of the Department of Education has not been a complete and utter unmitigated disaster for the slightly more than 40 years it has existed. Our scholastic achievement has done nothing but go down and down and down and down. They have inserted things into nationwide. The federal government should have absolutely no involvement in school curricula, period. But what did we get from Barack Obama? I mean, there's a lot of people watching this, I'm sure, who have tried to help their kid with Common Core math homework. Shaniqua and Abdul are headed to the social justice protest, and if Shaniqua drives her electric car and Abdul rides a rent-a scooter, fucking who gets there first and yells the louder, shit like that. Shit that was absolutely impenetrable, that was mathematically useless, that didn't teach a goddamn thing, but was obviously designed to push a very specific political point of view. That's what we get in math class now. We don't get kids learning math. We get kids learning how to be left-wing ideologues. And that's what we get pretty much in every subject now, especially in the universities.
So how do you reckon the grading scheme in these classes work? Is it the math accuracy that gets you the A, or the dogma repetition and chanting?
It is the dogma repetition, 100%. Because how many people have we heard? How many race hucksters have we heard tell us that math is racist? Expecting kids to get right answers on tests is racist. Expecting people to show up on time is racist. Basically, every aspect of responsible human conduct is somehow racist, which is really a great bar to set for the achievement of your children, isn't it?
Time blindness.
You don't have to be good at anything, because if you were good at anything, that would be racist.
Right.
It's a hell of a worldview, really.
the premise of time blindness, I think, goes farther to explain this most recent generation than anything else. The idea that because you forgot to look at a clock, you shouldn't be held responsible for looking at clocks.
Yeah, exactly. That's a fantastic way of putting it, because that's what we're talking about.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
I didn't work on time because I forgot to look at my clock. I don't do alarms.
Yeah. Clocks are the tool of white racist colonial settlers.
This man right here, he says it best quite often. We need to teach critical thinking skills, not memory exercises. That is exactly correct. But the modern scholastic system does not want a critically thinking student. They want a nice conformed student that'll walk up and down the halls quietly and not beat up their friends for fun.
Yep. They want students who have the correct opinions, and that is all they want.
Exactly.
The absolute last thing they are concerned with is producing people who are prepared to be self-sufficient adults living in the real world and being productive members of society.
I mean, anytime you remove civics classes in exchange for gender study classes, you're going to run into some immediate problems the next few years of graduations, because these people are going to get out and have no idea how the universe actually functions.
And to the extent that there even are history classes anymore, it is only hyphenated history that is intended, again, to push a very specific political viewpoint. So instead of history class the way we used to have history class, where you would have ancient history, modern history, now we just have Black history, gay history, minority this history, and and it's all about indigenous history. It is all about some non-white group being oppressed by the evil white man, and that is the only kind of history that kids learn in school anymore, which is not learning history. It is being indoctrinated.
But you've got to admit, it does cover a pretty good breadth of history. I mean, let's be honest. That whole English Empire thing, that wasn't an accident. It was pretty much straight purpose.
Well, right, and it's interesting when you get into people on the left, especially young people. They love to say that European colonialism was 100% bad and evil, and it never should have happened, and everybody would be so better off if the Europeans had just stayed in Europe. But answer me this. Why does everybody in areas that were formerly colonized by Europeans still speak European languages and practice European religions? Doesn't that seem strange if everything European is so intrinsically evil? Why does everybody play soccer and cricket all across the world? If the British are so bad, if the British Empire was so bad, and you want to go try and make everybody stop playing soccer, good luck with that. Soccer was invented by English schoolboy aristocrats in the mid-19th century, and that is all there is to it. And they exported it to the rest of the world through the empire and colonialism, and everybody freaking loves it.
Right?
Try to make the Indians and the Pakistanis stop playing cricket and tell me how that goes for you.
You try to stop one Brazilian kid from kicking a soccer ball, see how that goes over. Just one.
Oh, I know. Yeah. And it has been, I mean, to the extent that we have a global interconnected culture, it is largely the result of the fact that European sports and games and languages were exported to the rest of the world through colonialism and through empire. And moreover, why is it that only the British seem to ever get a hard time for being oppressive colonial masters when they were easily, in point of fact, the most benevolent colonial master there was? If we want to talk about evil colonial occupiers, How come the
Leopold.
Spaniards get a pass? How come the Belgians get a pass? The English never cut off people's arms in Africa because they didn't pick enough crops. The Belgians did that.
Yeah.
We don't ever hear about the evils of Belgian colonization, do we? It is only the British who get hammered and hammered and hammered. And why is that?
The narrative.
Because they're just the most evil, damn it. I mean, who eradicated the Atlantic slave trade without anybody asking them to? It was the Royal Navy. That is a real thing that happened.
Yeah, no, like seriously, folks, this is a real deal. On a random Tuesday, the British Navy decided, well, that's not nice, and they just quit doing it. And not long after that, they looked at other ships and said, y'all are going to stop too. And they went, nah, man, this is the most lucrative ship we've ever done in our lives. And they went, no, shink, shink, you're going to stop too. And then they had to.
Right. Because after they had finished winning the Napoleonic Wars, they had this gigantic navy that really didn't have much of a mission anymore. So they said, well, how can we do some good in the world? Let's eradicate the Atlantic slave trade, and let's do some exploration missions to map the unmapped parts of the globe. Let's try to find the Northwest Passage. Let's try to get to Antarctica. I mean, they did things during the Pax Britannica, during the first 50 years of the Pax Britannica, that were of immeasurable value to the human species in general, that everybody has benefited from. And what the hell credit do they get for it? They get hammered as evil bastards. And it's completely divorced from the historical record. And yet it just gets said and repeated as if it is gospel truth, when it is not. It is a flat out lie.
I got a T-shirt proposition came up the other day, and I want to do a T-shirt that says I enjoyed the Pax Americana.
I'd wear that.
Right? Everyone I've told it about has exactly that. They're like, oh yeah, I can totally see it. But that's what I feel like we're living in right now. We are in the tail end, the failing edge, the ragged edge of the Pax Americana, right before the barbarians start trying to sack Rome.
Historians will view times we are living in as Pax Americana, which began with the end of the war.
Right. I don't know if that's just
and then you've got the two world wars, which, as we've talked about before, in my opinion, is basically one war with a 20-year interbellum period. And before that, you've got 100 years of the Pax Britannica, and that is what allowed us to build a globally, commercially intersecting civilization. Because the thing that matters the most of all is the freedom of commerce on the high seas. And between 1815 and 1914, it was the Royal Navy that guaranteed that. And since 1945, it's been our job to guarantee that. And it's a very important job. And it's something that the isolationists, the people who are hardcore isolationists who think we should just bring everything back and look outward, it's the thing that they missed. And it's something crucially important. And it's why they're really a bunch of clueless dumbasses.
Right.
Because the world absolutely needs there to be freedom of navigation on the high seas, or else the world we have built for ourselves is going to collapse in fairly short order.
That's true. There's also the issue of air travel. This follows the same premise as the previous statement, except it's American air bases that keeps that open.
Yep. Yeah, and when people say they think we should give up all of our overseas military installations, I tell those people to fuck off, because we won those fair and square. Those are our right of conquest, and we should keep them forever. Our bases in Japan, our bases in Okinawa, our bases in Italy and the UK and Germany, we shouldn't give up a damn one of them.
Not one square inch.
Not one square inch.
I agree. All right. So there's another aspect of this whole State of the Union address that sparked my interest a little bit. And I'm not sure exactly what Biden was getting at with this, but he was talking about expunging people who were charged federally with marijuana possession and removing their charges. Now, is he talking current charges, or do you reckon he's talking about like people who are in jail for moving massive weight?
I'm not exactly sure, but of all the pressing issues we have, is that really one of them? I come on, he's just trying to score political points with drug users. That's all he is. He feels like he's bleeding support on his left. So, what little bits of candy can we toss to those idiots? That's all that is.
And it worked. I'm not going to vote for
that. Yeah, and oftentimes it does work. Yep. You're absolutely right.
Yep. So here we are. We're sitting here in 2024, coming up on an election year. We're going at it balls to the wall, and this man decides to utilize his State of the Union address for a campaign speech. I can't disagree politically with that decision. However, wouldn't you expect him to have a little bit of a better writer in the background somewhere?
Yes. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I honestly do not understand what the people are thinking who write his content. And especially because you remember there was a lot of fallout from the fact that, oh God, he referred to Laken Riley's murderer as an illegal, sin of sins. We wouldn't want to offend the fucking murderer. But then he has to do a damage control interview yesterday on MSNBC, and he grovels and apologizes about how sorry he is for calling this murderer an illegal. And, if only these people got as upset about the actual murders as they do about the words that are used to describe the killers. I mean, do you want to talk about sending an incoherent moral message? Isn't that about as incoherent as moral messaging gets? Oh gosh, it's too bad this young lady got killed, but we don't want to use the wrong words in describing her. And God, but the people who write the stuff that he says, and make no mistake, everything he says, whether it's in a speech or an interview, somebody wrote for him. His handlers live in terror of him ever going off the script. That's why they always put a stack of note cards in his hand. But they're writing this stuff, and you have to. He could have scored some political points for himself if he had answered that question by saying, yes, I called him an illegal, and he is an illegal, and he's a freaking murderer, allegedly, and I don't care about being nice to that guy. That might have actually earned him some goodwill.
You're not
But
wrong.
He didn't go that route, and because the people who write his content, they really only care about appeasing the far left. That's why, so his biggest problems right now, as far as they're concerned, are he doesn't love terrorism enough, and he called an illegal alien an illegal alien.
Right.
And that's your messaging strategy in your re-election year.
He called a shovel, right?
Yes.
And
right before he stepped on a rake.
Offended Nancy Pelosi so much that she had to appear the very next morning to correct him that he should, or was it that afternoon, later that evening, that he should have said undocumented.
I believe it was the next morning, but yeah.
Yeah.
She didn't feel the need to do any interviews about how awful the murder was, just the word, because the word is what matters. Reality doesn't matter. Only semantics matter.
Don't believe your lying eyes when you go to the grocery store and the eggs are like $7.50 a freaking dozen.
And these are, and it stands to reason, because these, after all, are the same people who tell us things like, "Oh, your words are violence. Silence is violence." So if you don't say the thing we like, then you are violent.
Yeah. Well, that's always been the way of politics, is to other the other side in such a way that your constituents can stomach the things that they're going to do to them. I mean, war works the same way.
And what did he, how many personal attacks did he level against Donald Trump in this speech? Wasn't it about a dozen? I think somebody counted, and it was about a dozen. And when have we ever heard that in a State of the Union speech?
we counted 7 events where he blamed the previous administration for things. But he mentioned Trump's a bunch of times.
And we've gotten a little bit of we've gotten a little bit ahead of ourselves here, because I actually wanted to open by pointing out the stupidity and the futility and the pointlessness of the whole phenomenon of a State of the Union address, because there is no requirement for this speech in the Constitution, even though a lot of people think there is. The only requirement in the Constitution here, I have it, and I will quote from it right now. The President shall give to the Congress information on the State of the Union and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. And every president up until Woodrow Wilson fulfilled this requirement by simply sending a letter, which is the way it still should be, because that's all you need to do. There doesn't need to be a big, ostentatious, extravagant, stage-managed production that is pretty much only a campaign speech for the president. And Joe Biden removed any and all doubt about that on Thursday, because this this was the campaigniest speech that may have ever been given by a president in the congressional chamber. It was
I made an observation. This is the face of white guilt. This is the face of white guilt. This is the face of trans oppression. Red flag right there. Red flag, red flag. I mean, if my dog had a face like that, I'd shave its butt and teach it to walk backwards. I'm just saying.
He said it, not me.
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
I'm just, man, I mean, I'm so sick. I'm so sick of some of this stuff. The fact that I can't turn on a freaking Disney movie without having an agenda shoved down my throat. Wish, yep. Perfect example. Wish could have been a magnificent movie. All the ingredients were there. They come in halfway through, they swap out the villain for the real villain, and there is no redemption for the villain. He's just an evil old grumpy fuddy-duddy who doesn't want anybody to be happy. When the actual plot of the movie is essentially that this child is an ungrateful, overstepping revolutionary who takes over the entire government in order to grant everyone's wishes like it's some kind of weird communist utopia, not realizing that in doing so, she destroys everything she thinks she's going to save, because some wishes shouldn't be granted.
You can't even open up the home screen on Disney Plus without being bombarded with woke agenda. It's really astounding. And they can't figure out why their stock price has been crashing so hard, why nobody goes to any of their movies anymore, why all of their series fail. It's just a complete mystery to them, apparently. It's almost like people don't want agenda shoved in their face constantly.
Go figure. Right? Isn't that an amazing
It's almost like people just want to watch fun family movies. Imagine that.
What was the first movie you went and saw after the lockdown?
Top Gun Maverick, twice.
Oh, you go, girl. I didn't manage to get to see that one until after it came on Amazon. I did immediately watch it.
Well, yeah, when I went and saw Dune this week, it was my fourth visit to the movie theater since the China virus. I saw Top Gun Maverick twice, and last year I went and saw Oppenheimer.
This was my first trip back to the movie theaters.
Bravo to you.
I generally I worked in movie rentals and stuff like that most of my life. I've always just waited for them to come out on some other medium rather than going to movie theaters, because for the past 10 years, 90% of the films that come out that you think were going to be really, really good were literal woke garbage. They were,
and man, when we went the other night, that theater, our 18 screen local megaplex, that place was a goddamn ghost town. They didn't even have the box office open. You had to go in the door and go to the snack bar to buy your freaking tickets. We go in and we buy our tickets. We go all the way into our auditorium. We left a couple times to go to the bathroom, and then the movie ends, and we never saw another moviegoer the entire time, except for the 3 people who were in the auditorium watching the movie with us. It was freaking crazy.
Well, we went specifically on a matinee, Saturday matinee. Maybe it was Friday matinee. And we were expecting it to be completely ghost town, like you're saying. And we actually had about 20 people in the theater watching Dune with us. And something interesting that I noticed, the previous last movie before lockdown, I believe, was probably Spider-Man, one of the Spider-Man movies. And during that movie, there were at least, 20 people in there, and everybody went to the bathroom before the movie was over. Dune went through, and I only saw 2 people out of that 20 that were watching that left the place at all. One guy walked down to the very edge and just stood there and finished the movie. Stood there for like an hour, like thought it was going to end in just a minute, and it would be over. And he just wow, right? So
I did really enjoy the picture, though.
It was a good one. If I think it might be important to note that this movie was made to placate both the people who have never read any Dune books and people who have. And that is a tall order. That's a very difficult line to walk. And so go ahead. I think they did a very good job utilizing Sand as a primary character.
And I was kind of impressed by how little expositional information was delivered. It's the filmmakers kind of assume that you've either seen the first movie or read the books to some extent. And I appreciated that, because I don't like big exposition dumps.
I think that they assume that you've got an annoying friend who's going to be sitting there with a bag of popcorn in their hand and that Dune bucket going, all right, so that's a Bene Gesserit, and they have like force powers, and they do all of the planning for all of everything, and you're not allowed to make computers because they once tried to take over the world. And that guy, I'm that guy. I'm my friend's.
Yeah, and that's probably the best way to explain it to a lot of people, is to just put it in the context of Star Wars, because everybody knows how Star Wars works.
Well, that was one of the things when I came out of it. My wife looked at me. She was like, I wasn't very impressed with that movie. And I said, I can understand that, having watched the film and knowing that you've never even had a conversation about Dune, of which I'm aware. Just know that Dune is the source material for Star Wars, Star Trek, Warhammer 40K, and virtually every other sci-fi franchise, with Battlestar Galactica. All of these things harken back to Dune.
It is probably the most influential work in all of science fiction, I would submit.
It is influential almost. It's almost, and this is going to be a hard one to sell. It's almost as influential on science fiction as Tolkien is on fantasy.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of connective tissue between the two franchises, I think. When you get right down to it, I think Frank Herbert probably had Tolkien pretty fresh in his mind when he was writing the first book.
Obviously, I mean, when you look at the amount of lore that has been attached to various parts of it, I mean, there are aspects of Dune that it takes 4 chapters to explain why this woman's standing there.
Yeah.
It would take
Tolkien was
it would take me an hour to be able to explain Paul Atreides' mother's genealogy satisfactorily enough for you to understand why it was important for Paul to be on Arrakis and why the Emperor sent them there in the first place.
Yes, because Frank Herbert built an entire fictional universe with its own lore and mythology and geography and everything. And he was only really the second guy to do that after J.R.R. Tolkien in Lord of the Rings. And so it's impossible to say there's not a great deal of inspiration happening there, and wonderfully so.
And the utilization of sand, I know. I heard it from my wife. Like, it had a lot of sand. The sand shouldn't be a primary feature of anything, and yet in Arrakis on Dune, this is the case. The desert itself. Anyone out there who's ever played Dark Sun or ever played the video game Conan's, the most recent Conan's video game, The Dark Desert or whatever it is. Both of these games have a distinctive feature in them, which includes the landscape as part of the main protagonist arc. If you're going to survive in these places, you have to live the way these people live. And that's sort of the lesson that Atreides is being taught here, is you have to conform to the local customs. You have to rub the blue mud in the right direction around your navel when you see the natives doing it.
Shit, anybody who's ever lived in North Africa or the Arabian Peninsula or the Levant can tell you that the desert sand absolutely is a creature unto itself. Because it determines and dictates pretty much everything about your daily life when you live in that environment. You are dealing with sand and mitigating the effects of sand all day, every day. It's like breathing.
You ever wonder why those channels that rebuild trucks, you know, the Middle Eastern guys you see out there just raw balling a freaking truck out of just raw steel? Just go out there, a bunch of hammers, beat the son of a bitch into the shape of the truck, weld some shit together, poof, there's a truck there.
Be a truck, goddammit!
The reason
I'll keep hitting you until you turn into a truck, you motherfucker.
Basically, I mean, dude, some of them are really, really talented doing things in flip-flops that amaze me. But the reason these people have become expert at these things is because the sand destroys everything. They have to be experts in this. Thank you, Harry. We appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean that's why sandblasting is a thing. We learned how to sandblast from watching what sand does in nature. Like, wow, sand can strip the paint off of a thing pretty quick if you blast a bunch of it.
That's true. There's one feature in this movie that I thought was very, very well done. It's something we haven't seen properly perpetrated in a film in a while. They have used prophecy and visions from the spice to show possible futures, right? All through the first and second movie, Homie's having these weird visions every time he catches a heavy dose of spice. He's like, oh shit, there's this chick, yada, 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 love story and the whole nine. When he finally reaches his final form, as it were, my man is swinging the most amazing Big D weapon in the galaxy. At the end of this movie, you get the impression that a whole lot of the fighting, the warfare, all the shenanigans has been largely dealt with. But knowing the further lore of the universe that it's in, you realize that all that's happened is one emperor has changed for another, and the Sardaukar are no longer in power, and now the Fremen are the kill stroke of the emperor. They are the hand of the emperor.
And one of the things I always found particularly interesting about the Dune universe is you've got a world where you have interstellar, faster than light travel, super advanced vehicles, and super advanced cognition, and everybody uses bladed weapons.
That's explained in the lore, though.
I know. I just think it's an interesting narrative device. It's
beautiful, dude. It makes Star Wars make sense. Without without the concept of a shield, it always bothered me that you have these elite soldiers using laser swords because it makes no sense. Even if they have pre-perceptive powers, they would have to dodge before I pulled the trigger. It makes no sense. But you have a shield generator that renders fast-moving objects static. You have a reason to use a blade again. There's a perfectly logical explanation for being a freaking samurai suddenly.
Yeah, and for, for narrative storytelling purposes, battle with bladed weapons is just more interesting than battle with ranged weapons is. It's a much more intimate form of combat. Much more personal form of combat.
In the first movie, they did a scene with what was his name? Not Dakota. It's something like that though. Oh, I had his name right.
Duncan, Idaho.
Idaho, Dakota.
You were close. Couple states away.
It's a couple states off. That's all.
I always hated that name. Like, why would you give one of your characters a name like that in outer space, Frank? It's fine. Man. I got over it eventually.
Yeah, no, but he's such a badass, though. I mean, oh my God. Homie does what Homie fails to do what Paul does successfully. Duncan is basically a Green Beret super soldier who's sent into the desert to go learn these people's ways so that we don't fail when we come here. He comes back. He talks to Paul, 45 minutes maybe total in the book. They meet like 2 or 3 times. They have a little slow motion night fight, and then Duncan's off to go frimming it up again somewhere. And next thing you know, Paul's crashing in the desert. Yep. When Duncan does his final stand in the movie, it's hundreds of Sardaukar. In the book, Homie leaves a trail of bodies at every single door. Every doorway is a tight spot, and they come in and they fight him to a point where they can move him over far enough to destroy the lock and open the door. But then he reinserts himself in the way of the door and holds them off, building a wall of bodies, just dropping them left, right, and center, and then retreats back to the next door and holds them off from that door for a while, giving Paul and his mother a chance to escape. In the movie, they did it justice, but not real justice, if you get what I'm saying. You find out how dangerous friends really are in that scene. This is the first inkling you get.
Yeah, and you were
Go ahead.
Well, you were talking a moment ago about Spice. And I was thinking about as we've kind of been alluding to, the straight line that you can draw inspirationally from Lord of the Rings to Dune to Star Wars, and Spice is one of those things. You might almost say that Dune is what happened when Frank Herbert tried to write Lord of the Rings when he was on shrooms, because he was very open about the fact that Spice, that whole thing was derived from his own psychedelic experiences that he was experimenting with during the time of the writing. So yeah, and you've got the same thing with the emphasis on bladed weapons from the one to the, and then you've got energy shields, and then you've got a glowing laser sword. It's kind of a nice perfect progression from the one to the next to the other.
You can follow Spice even more directly though, because Tatooine is a direct Arrakis analog. And
absolutely.
Spice is literally the name of the super drug in Star Wars.
Yep.
There's not even a veil of comedy.
And that obviously is a deliberate homage.
The Sarlacc is a sandworm, obviously.
Oh yeah, you're damn right. It's an old tired sandworm that doesn't move anymore, that just sits around and waits for people to throw things in its mouth.
Yeah, which is convenient as hell if you think.
But yeah, I mean the design of the orifice, it's exactly the same. It's an angry tooth having vagina. Vagina dentata, I believe, is the scientific term. You're going to be all right, brother.
I don't know, man. I haven't gotten tickled. Oh, my
I love it when I make you break down like that.
Oh, good girl. You did a good job. I like it. It's a workout. So, like, okay, let's back up and look at this from like an economic framework, right?
Okay.
We've got say the capitalist pig dog line we're working on.
You are a dirty capitalist pig dog.
There you go. So the Harkonnens represent the dirty capitalist pig dogs, whereas your basic Fremen encampment over here represents these Antifa types and BLM types over here, right? You can tell by the tight pants.
Yeah, and also, you know, even if a story is 60 years old, you know, you can always fit it into whatever the political paradigm happens to be today. Which is you can do with all great stories. That's what makes great stories immortal.
Right. And if you can't do that, then either it's possible that the literature may have gone out of vogue and may no longer be applicable, but it's more likely that you're not looking at it through the right interpretation of the literature if it's judged by the rest of the world to be
right. And just because the source material is no longer necessarily in fashion doesn't mean that it's not still highly influential on what's happening now.
Exactly. So when you look at your modern movies and you're trying to figure out where some of these ideas came from, take a look at Dune. Go look back at some of your old early sci-fi epics, because there's a lot there that hasn't been utilized in years.
Oh, I know. And I'm glad you brought that up because, you know, as you know, I spent last year, I pretty much swore off trying to watch new movies, and I just dove into classic Hollywood, you know, all the great old pictures that I've never gotten around to seeing. And so I watched so many of them last year, and there are so many great revelations that you get because you are familiar with things that you've seen in movies from your own lifetime, but you don't understand where those references came from unless you watch the older movies that inspired the people who made the movies you're familiar with. And things start to make so much more sense because you can see where all the connective tissue is and how everything derives from something else. And it makes it so much more gratifying to watch the newer things when you know where the references came from.
It's just such a deep lore. The series itself is a very cerebral work. There's a lot of thinking in the books that and a lot of like exposition that works because it's a book that doesn't translate into the story. And looking at these two movies, it's going to be a difficult creation to make a movie to cap these two off and to do it successfully without an obvious change. Because I mean, I think they instituted that change at the end of this movie, that distinct difference.
So where are we?
Muad'Dib has taken his place.
I remember it's been so long since I read the books.
When Muad'Dib takes his place as the actual Messiah, when he turns and looks at them and goes, well, maybe you're right. Maybe I am this guy from the prophecy, and maybe I can do this thing that you think I can do, but we won't find out just sitting here. And that decision is actually made by his girlfriend because she is a Fremen fighter. Fremens, all female Fremens, have a little bit of that Bene Gesserit touch. One of the first things the female Fremens learn is how not to get pregnant. So when she dedicated herself as a Fremen fighter, she forsake any chance of her becoming pregnant before she either dies in battle or is 40 and becomes a trainer. At which
I might get pretty full of myself if I was Spider-Man's girlfriend and Paul Atreides' girlfriend.
Yeah, I mean, so at this point where the movie ends here is kind of fudging 2 points in the book together that didn't really go together.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to think of is where in the books we've left off at the end of the second movie, and I can't quite place it since it's been so long since I read the books.
About a third into the third book, which is where Paul actually takes the throne of the Empire, but he still doesn't have control of all the Empire's gizmos, and all the houses are already plotted against him. And the only thing that makes this possible is the fact that they thought there were no Atreides left, and so there was no direct claim to the throne that wasn't Harkonnen. And finding out that Paul's mother was the Baron's other daughter, right, means that not only does he have a legitimate claim through the Atreides line, he has a straight up legitimate imperial claim through the Harkonnen line, leaving him the only individual in the galaxy with a solid genetic claim to the throne on both sides of his genetics. And that is supposed to overrule any other economic considerations for who's emperor.
And we were talking backstage before the show about my belief that so far as I've seen, I don't think I've ever seen a cinematic adaptation of written source material that was ever as faithful an adaptation as these two pictures have been. I mean, because, you know, obviously with like with Lord of the Rings, with that film series, you had various things that were either added or omitted or shifted from one book to a different movie. Like you've got, you know, things in the second book that happened in the first movie, and, you know, things get shifted around, but there's been less of that in the Dune series than I think I've ever seen before. And I think the filmmakers deserve credit for that.
Yeah. I really
even if it might leave some of the viewers hopelessly lost trying to understand what's going on.
Right. Like I said, this movie may actually require one of those annoying friends with glasses that says, well, actually, you know, but the main fudge point that I've found is the distinction between the point Muad'Dib claims his name as Muad'Dib versus the point where he takes his position on the throne, or puts himself in the position of being on the throne. It kind of feels like an old Conan of the Barbarian moment where he just backs up and sits down on it after a fight. You know, he didn't intentionally become emperor, but
to see your enemies driven before you and hear the lamentations of their women.
Yep.
Sorry, what it couldn't help
like. The Riddle of Steel. Thank you. And thank you again. That should always be reminded. The Riddle of Steel. That was a good movie. Good God. That was
but yeah, if I tried to watch these movies with Lady Curmudgeon, I would spend the entire time explaining the lore and the background to her, because she would be asking questions constantly. Who's that? Why is this happening? Who the hell's that guy? But what about this?
That's one of the things on the way.
That's exactly how that would go.
Rachel was like, well, I mean, I just don't feel like I understand what happened in all of that. I said, you saw a love story that ends broken, which is how most love stories end. She was like, yeah, there's a lot of sand. And I was like, I know. But listen, there's so much going on.
A love story where everybody is off their ass on psychedelics.
Yeah, no, see, that's another thing. The whole Fremen army are essentially the Celtic berserkers painting up in blue woad and running off into battle. They're nuts, dude.
I'm glad you said berserkers, because that was actually my favorite sci-fi series when I was a kid. I was a Fred Saberhagen guy. I loved the Berserker series, and I wish they had made some movies out of it, and I don't know why they haven't. I wish they would. Did you ever read those?
Maybe. I read a lot, dude. I would need more details. There's a particular,
and it's difficult to recall things one read decades ago.
Right. Well, that's the weird thing about me is it's like, if you can hum a few bars, I can fake it, but not really. You know, if you tell me a little bit about the story, I'll pick up something that rings a bell, and as soon as that bell gets rang, it's like, oh yeah, brrr, right? Like Magic Kingdom for Cell.
And like, yeah, I mean, pretty much all of because I really don't ever read fiction anymore. Ever, pretty much everything I read is history books. But when I was a teenager, just like every boy teenager, I read your standard sci-fi and fantasy books that every young boy is supposed to read. Your Dune series and your Lord of the Rings and so on. But
your Heinlein.
Yeah, and your Heinlein, and for me, your Fred Saberhagen, and things of that ilk. But it can be remarkable how well you do recall some of that stuff, even when it's been a whole hell of a lot of years. Like I probably haven't picked up a Dune book since I was 15, 16, but when I went and saw the first picture, I didn't need to do any background. I knew exactly what was going on because I had read the books one time 30 odd years ago.
Make Stupid People Famous just got the participation trophy of the show. I don't generally give them out over here. Congratulations. You could use that for your one cup, you dirty animal. Seeing it once is somebody played on you. Seeing it twice is you're a dirty animal. Could you?
My audience is so old they might not even get that joke.
It'd be like looking up Blue Waffle.
Yeah. 72% of my audience over age 55. Proud of it.
Yeah, there you go. Does that mean they're reasonable people?
Well, it means that my content appeals to the people with the most knowledge and wisdom. That's the way I choose to infer it.
Oh, I thought it might be that it appeals to boomers.
Yeah. Or maybe they just want to. Maybe they just want to watch a young guy, and I still qualify as young.
Ooh,
from their perspective.
There you go. How you like the new background?
Pretty flamey.
Yeah, it's a bunch of explosions. I figured we'd try it out, but it's all glitchy.
Well, I mean, it ties in well with our show title and our intro. I think it's all on theme, on point.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, the show's almost over. Where does the time go?
Yeah. That's why I'm digressing into absolutely nothingness. Because at some point in time, I'm gonna poke a button, and this is all gonna be over, and we're not gonna be able to talk to our friends, the conquistador, anymore.
I mean, and we could have spent the whole show on that stupid Biden speech, but I'm glad we didn't.
Oh no! See, I kind of already done that once, and I wasn't really given the chance to actually break it down the way I wanted to, and so it was good to go over it quickly and this, because there's a lot there that makes little.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you are a braver man than me being able to live stream that, because I was mentioning to you before we went on that I had a plan where I was gonna write my little monologue, and then I was gonna take detailed notes on the whole speech, and I could only get about 5 minutes into the goddamn thing before I just got so freaking infuriated I had to turn it off and watch a John Wayne movie and get happy again, and then I kept meaning to go back to it, and I just couldn't do it because that man makes me so freaking angry, man. I can't even set it aside and have, journalistic detachment for an hour to listen to it. And besides, if I had taken detailed notes on the whole thing, then the whole show would have been that, and there is no need for that. We don't want to dignify him that much.
I'm not sure you can. What's up, Devil Dog? Welcome in, bud. Good to see you.
Hello, Devil Dog.
We went through it, and we had a couple of conversations during it, but for the most part, he just sat there and watched it, which, I mean, different people, different strokes. I didn't understand the methodology, but I guess he's still getting his streaming legs or something.
Yeah, I don't think I could sit and watch that silently without comment. I don't know if I'm that strong.
Well, I mean, like I said, we did comment back and forth, but we didn't really pause it to do so. And so while we were commenting, we kind of missed some spots here and there. And I did, unfortunately, have to go back and check into the parts that I knew I'd missed because, you know, I can't speak
Yeah.
intelligently on it unless I actually have the information. Which John Wayne
Yep.
movie?
The Horse Soldiers, 1950. John Ford directed. It's John Wayne and William Holden. Fantastic picture. One of my favorite Wayne pictures. And I'm a big William Holden guy, so that's a bonus seeing the two of them on the screen together. Oh, am I talking us out? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you ever so much for joining us here on the Blast Radius. We sure do appreciate you being here with us doing this thing we do on Sundays, 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific. Please do be sure and join us next time. Tell a friend, recommend the video, like and subscribe and share and all that good stuff. Have a great week. Pleasant tomorrow. We will see you next time. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.